back, everyone. And this is the second session of the day. In the morning, we had a keynote speaker from MS Sapnendu Mohanty, and we covered very interesting topics on MAS innovation and APAC innovation and how interbank and inter-regulatory collaboration is happening. So if you have missed this session, then the recording is available, and please do watch that session. That is a very good foundation for today's whole day. Now, today we have identity as the core topic that we're going to discuss in the session. We have very interesting panel, and I'll just go through those panel introduction first, and then we'll look into the key topics. So we have Amit Goel. Amit is the country head for Pro. He has built Medici, the formerly LTP, as a new edge technology-enabled advisory and research firm, which was then considered the #1 global research and innovation platform for fintech in the world. The same was acquired by Pro, and he is consistently rated as both global and Asia's top 100 experts in fintech by various agencies. He is an angel investor in some of the top fintech and insurtech companies. We also have Sai Prasad today with us. Sai Prasad is currently acting as a technology advisor for WorldPay from FIS, and he's in crypto and Web3 area. He's a key contributor to blockchain community and has keen interest in Web3 and its important impact on various use cases that can transform the way we experience technology. He's serving as a co-chair of technology steering and product committee for Hedera, Hashgraph, and made his presence as a speaker for various industry forums and events. We have Ravikant Agarwal. Ravikant is VP for Polygon and looks after various strategic initiatives under Polygon. He is a seasoned business and strategy consultant with demonstrated history of working in management consultancy industry. He has worked in areas of blockchain, digital assets, digital identity, open finance, and data protection. We also have Shiv Agarwal. Shiv has more than 15 years of technology industry experience, having worked with global brands like Bank of America, Cathay Pacific, the Hartford, Lloyds of London, and Unilever, and more. He's currently leading Earth ID towards building a decentralized identity management platform with a vision of providing a universal ID to all human beings. So with this introduction, let's go into the core topics for the day. And I will start with Sai Prasad. Sai, first, please introduce yourself again if I have missed some specific areas about interest. And then please touch upon on the questions which are more kind of fundamental, which is what is identity and what are the traditional identity models like government issued identities, and how digital identity is becoming more prominent, like biometric scan and eKYC. So over to you, Sai.
Yeah, sure. First of all, welcome everyone on this session. I'm very excited to have you here and looking forward to hear from you on your ideas. So wish you best for that. So coming back to the topic, the identity, I think, identity is something, it starts from the moment we take the birth, right? And we have this birth certificate as a part of our identification. We have to show, especially not us, but our parents has to show to the government that we exist on this earth. So it starts from there. And eventually, if you see how this gets evolved, we have government issued IDs like SSN, and then you have health IDs, and with various organizations, you've been identified as a customer ID. Then you have passport IDs, and then if we expand to that, every other interactions that we have in the digital form, you being identified with your user IDs, and that's where our identification gets multifold expansion to the next levels. So if we talk about the overall digital IDs as a part of identification, I mean, starting from the government issued IDs, we already have those different government issued verification proofs in the form of Aadhaar or SSN. But in case of digital, the way the technology has evolved, the identification proofs has also been evolved. So now we are seeing the eKYC. In case of India, we have Aadhaar. If you remember, in case of when we had to purchase the SIM card in the, I think 5 or 10 years back, you have to actually give your Aadhaar ID or your PAN to the mobile SIM card issuer, but now you have to just use your thumbprint in order to get your SIM card, and that's how the eKYC has also evolved. The next, if you look at the biometric scan, right? Most of, in case of US, you have to just use your thumbprint or the Face ID in order to give the authentication proof for a specific apps, or even for that matter, when you are purchasing something, you are just using your biometric scan to purchase your groceries in the form of the NFC and all. Uh, other hand, you also have the tokenization that's been introduced in case of cards world, wherein your cards has been tokenized, and that tokenized form of cards has also been used for the payment rails as well. If I have to take it further for the web identities, in the web identities, in a typical technological landscape, we have user ID and passwords, and then it got evolved with the authentication models like SSO. Then we have federated identities, wherein you have a trust domains, you have the identity provider, and with the SAML, you create the consortiums, and with the SAML, you can actually get your user authenticated with a single federated identities. We also have the token based, like you have uh, JWT and JSON tokens that also been used for the user authentication and making sure that your security also is intact. We have also seen the recent trend that most of the websites are also using your LinkedIn or the Google ID. So you don't have to create a new user ID or the passwords, but all you have to do is use your Google or the LinkedIn ID, and then you get authenticated for that specific website or the portal. And this has also been evolved that you are now getting identified with your phone number. You just have to keep your phone number in, and they'll send you the OTP, and then let you into that specific website or that for that service.
Thanks, Sai. So now, with that foundation about what's identity, what is the traditional identity models, and Sai rightly pointed about the digital identity and how web identity is evolved over past. Let me move to Amit. And Amit, you talked about global view on identity in our prep meetings, and I definitely love to reiterate those things about position, reputation score, and ownership. So over to you for these concepts and how you see identity in a global context.
Sure. Thanks, Prashant. And thanks, Sai, for the overview. So it's kind of very hard to discuss the topic of digital ID in a short period of time, because, it's a very expensive field.
That's correct.
Basically, my background is that I have spent last 10 years in Fintech. In 2012-13, we actually imagined that Fintech is going to become a big industry. And so we started building Medici, which was like Bloomberg for Fintech. And so basically we were tracking all these 17,000 Fintech startups all over the world. And very often we will hear issues around, KYC, digital onboarding. And even though a lot of progress has been made, I think digital identity overall still is broken. And then there are newer challenges and newer opportunities, like, in Web3 coming in. So with that in context, maybe basically where I would like to start with is that post-COVID, what happened is that digital transactions started skyrocketing. And at the same time, what is happening is that a lot of customer data records are getting stolen. PII data is at risk. The fraud vectors are actually becoming very, very complex and are growing. And the fraudsters are actually becoming very, very smart, right? So in that context, if you see the global landscape of digital identity, it includes lots of things, right? It's not just about doc scanning companies which do digital onboarding, but there are authentication companies, there are IAM companies, there are physical access control companies, there are endpoint security companies, and so on and so forth. I can keep going on, right? So it's a very, very wide space, but I'm going to just focus on the one very simple concept which we always follow in this space, which is how do you bring convenience and security at the same time, right? So How do you take care of building a digital identity solution which can take care of both? And in that context, I feel that a lot of it can be defined in terms of what we call as possession, reputation, and ownership. So possession is that how do you sort of make sure that the person is in possession of the phone, and more specifically the phone number. Let's say, if you're doing a phone-centric identity, and why I'm saying phone is because increasingly as a percentage of the overall transactions, it's all happening on the phone, right? And going forward, it's only increasing, right? So phone has become a centerpiece of digital identity as a whole. And so the first challenge is always, how do you make sure that that phone number is the one which is doing the transaction, right? So there are obviously older methods like OTP, but then I'm sure all of you would have come across like how unsecure the OTPs are. There are lots of challenges with that, man-in-the-middle attacks. There are lots of researchers who have shown that intermediaries are able to divert it. There's social engineering happening with OTPs. The Jamtaras of the world is happening there. And so there are better techniques available today. There is something that we call as silent mobile authentication. So there are signals today from telcos and other third-party data sources. You can combine them, run your models, and then basically do this kind of silent mobile authentication in the background, which is stronger and easier and more convenient than OTPs, right? So there's a whole lot of work which is happening on the possession side. Then I think ownership side is something that all of us are very aware of. I'm talking like, especially in India, we have a lot of KYC and doc scanning companies, which are basically using one of these government IDs that Sai was talking about, and digitizing them and using them in various ways, also checking for liveliness. And there's a lot of development that has happened over there. But that's not the only way of proving the ownership. There are, again, multiple methods being used. For example, we have one of the best digital identity systems in the world in the form of Aadhaar. It's completely digital, available as public goods APIs, and can handle 100 million transactions a day or something like that. And but then, again, there are many things that can be done around it and over and above it, because the fraud vectors are actually increasing. Like every time we create a solution like this, in the next 3-4 years, there are newer set of challenges which are coming. So fraudsters are very smart. They're moving faster than us as an industry. So for example, one of the big things which is being talked about right now is that instead of having one-to-one relationship, like every bank, every fintech company, or every company trying to authenticate a customer, every single time is not a great solution, neither in terms of cost or in terms of the experience itself. So can we create reusable identities, right? So can we actually create the identity once and it can be used again and again? And there have been some attempts. For example, there is CKYC in India, which is, people are focusing on it a lot. But the problem with some of these is that you're storing, again, data centrally. And I'm not sure if these are like zero knowledge proof systems. So there is obviously cyber attacks can happen on these. And so it becomes very interesting, right? And it's an evolving field. I don't think there's anybody knows a clear path right now or knows like a successful business model in this. So that is why all of us are kind of very interested in this field. It's the cutting edge of technology, and you're always trying to create better and better solutions. So reusable identity, I think, is very interesting in that sense. So I talked about possession and ownership, but there's another field which is very interesting. It's called reputation. So, for example, India does not see a lot of SIM swap fraud, but there is a lot of SIM swap fraud which happens in US, Europe, and my guess is that either we are not seeing it or we are not being able to diagnose or detect it in India, right? They might be happening in different formats. If not on the SIM, it may be happening on the eSIM side of things. And so there are reputational systems now, reputational scores, which are able to prevent that kind of fraud. So if a SIM was, say, for example, what people are doing is, Jamtara kind of case, I'll tell you, people do social engineering. They get all the details about you and they go to the telco and get a new SIM card issued. So your phone will be blocked for like a couple of days and you won't know what is happening. And in the meantime, this fraudster is getting all the OTPs and, trying to do all the transactions because he has a lot of other information as well. So how do you prevent this, right? There are reputational scores and reputational systems today, which immediately detect that a SIM swap has happened. So I think once you put all of this together, right, the key there is that it's not just about one or two things. You have to do all of this at once in real time and do it at the lowest cost possible And as we say in the tech industry, cheaper, better, faster. Like you have to basically bring it to that, right? So possession, reputation, ownership, all of these bring it together. The one last thing I would say is that we are actually at Prove, we are working today with a lot of big Web3 platforms. I would not name them right now, but essentially what I find very interesting is that in the Web2 world, the regulators asked all of us to basically do full KYC and then onboard the customer. And I think for all the good reasons. But then the Web3 world gives us something which we have not seen before, which is decentralization of everything. Now, what we are saying is like, can we bring both these things together? Like, can you do off-chain identity and bring it on-chain, right? And I'm sure Ravi will throw a lot of light on this. He's an expert in this area, but very fascinating developments happening. Overall, I would say that what keeps me awake at night and what keeps me super interested in this field is that there is absolutely no clear path right now, and everybody is experimenting, and there's lots of new stuff which will come in, and probably one or two of those business models will prove out. Very, very keen to learn and understand what's going to happen.
And Amit, I think security will play a major role here for every other model that gets evolved here, that how secure your practices are.
Yeah, I think digital identity without looking at some of these fraud checks and identity proofing is kind of building digital identity in vacuum. Like that is a very central piece of all of this.
Thanks, Amit. The subsequent question, you touched on Web3 and how exactly that is going to be the next evolution. So next question is to Ashiv. And we'd like to touch upon about the rise of reusable identity, the point that Amit mentioned, and how the SSI is something which is positioned in this space. And what are the current SSI trends and SSI models? So if you can just put some light on those areas, that would be great, Sid.
Sure, absolutely. No, I think Amit has basically set a good ground with respect to why actually we need SSI or a decentralized identity, right? Because obviously, when we look at the current industry, obviously there are, I think, solutions which are talking about digital onboarding, right? Sort of basically helping organizations onboard their customers, their users, their employees faster, right? But obviously, I think the more we innovate, we basically open new loopholes for frauds, right? So that is what all of us have realized. And I think I just want to basically take one step back here, because obviously, when I look at it from my experience, because I have worked in the industry for over 18 years now, and I have worked in the industry as an enterprise architect and working with global brands and helping them with their basically digital transformations. One thing that came out was that a lot of these big organizations, they are basically struggling to basically be compliant with data protections and privacy laws around the world, right? Obviously, GDPR is one of the biggest ones, but we also have something in India as well, right, which is on the table. So I think, and then the problem is like they don't know how to basically manage the data of their customers. And secondly, if they are not compliant, they can be basically fined a few percentages of their annual revenue, which would be into billions. So from an organization standpoint, I think there's a massive, it's a massive problem and a very expensive problem. But when we look at it from individual standpoint, right? So I think we are, while we say that this is my identity or this is my data, we don't have ownership, right? We don't even have privacy. And most of the identity documents or ID cards or credentials that we have as of today, they are very binary, right? So if I take out my driving license, I can, if I have to share it, I can either say that, okay, I'm happy to share it with you, but I'm not sharing it with you. I cannot do partial sharing, right? So from an individual standpoint, there's a lack of data ownership, privacy, and consent, right? And when you put these challenges together, I think a lot of the new solutions, even the new innovative solutions, they are falling short on the value proposition, right? In terms of how they're going to solve these challenges. And that is where basically self-sovereign identity or decentralized identity comes into the picture. So when we talk about SSI, right? So SSI, I think the key tenets of SSI are basically, it's about data ownership, right? So it's about the individual, the subject of the identity, right? It could be an individual, it could be an organization, it could be a smart device, but they are basically the owner of that data set, right? The ownership can be implemented in so many different ways, right? One of the ways is basically by sort of decentralizing the data, and every individual and organization basically keeping their data in their private wallets. But there are other ways of also implementing, right? A decentralized identity for that matter. But it's about how do you create ownership, first of all. The second thing is about privacy. How do you ensure that that an individual or the subject of an identity is able to basically share only the absolutely needed information for a given transaction? For example, I walk into a bar, I need to buy a drink. How do I prove that I'm an adult without showing my ID card? Or when I'm basically trying to access a club, or when I'm trying to basically open a bank account, or I'm trying to buy a property, when I'm trying to apply for a loan. See, every transaction needs some information, but right now we overshare. All right. And even if you look at the current digital onboarding solutions, likes of OnePages and Zoomios, they are making it more efficient, but still it's basically it's doing the same way. I'm still basically sharing my passport, I'm still sharing my ID card for a given transaction, and this is being repeated. So if I, as an individual, if I'm interacting with 10 different organizations or 10 different service providers, my identity is getting verified again and again, and they're capturing the same information again and again, right? So it's very, very repetitive. It's not, yes, it has moved a little ahead in terms of efficiency, but it's not there, right? There's massive efficiencies that we can bring to the table. And then it's also about when we look at how the organizations are sort of storing their data. Most of the organizations are storing their data centrally. They don't need most of the information, but they still have it. In an ideal world, in the Web3 world, where we are talking about peer-to-peer, right, where everything would be peer-to-peer, there would be no centralized databases or storages. I think the way we have to basically imagine this is that that the individuals will have their data, and then these service providers, they should have basically flags, right, in the database. For example, whether I, as an individual, do I have authorization to use a particular service? For example, am I authorized to drive a car? Am I authorized to basically fly? Am I authorized to basically sort of access this particular bank account? So more or less, they are yes and no type of questions. They don't need the actual data of the user. And this is what SSI enables, right? And I think there are different models in the industry, there are different providers in the industries. And based on, I think, the underlying technologies they use, based on the different features they provide, I think there are certain nuances with respect to what is good and what is bad. And then you can do multiple different comparisons. But the good part is that we are moving towards this, right? We are moving towards a world, and it's not just like companies like us or Tidy who are pushing for this, right? Even governments are now sort of acknowledging this aspect, right? Because what we are talking about here is like, we are talking about efficiency, right? We are talking about sustainability, because if you're automating these processes, if you're digitizing these processes in a way which are compliant with the data protection and privacy laws, you're also basically making organizations more sustainable by going paperless, right? And then eventually it's also about you're empowering the users with data ownership, privacy, and consent. And I think I just want to add one last point. It has a very big social aspect also, because while in India we can talk about Aadhaar, where 1 billion people have Aadhaar, right? And it has basically provided them access to finance, provided them access to insurance, and so on and so forth. But around the world, there are more than 3 billion people who don't have any sort of digital identity, and they are sort of missing in action from a digital ecosystem perspective. And that is one of the biggest opportunities in terms of driving social, financial, and digital inclusion.
Thanks, Shiv. So the other question, the follow-up questions on that will be, now that you introduced about SSI, how are these identities getting used in the newer fabrics like Metaverse, DeFi, NFT worlds? And can you give us some context about why it becomes more relevant into these areas?
So when we look at, okay, so one of the interesting aspects is that since pandemic, I think, as even Amit mentioned, right, that we are being pushed towards a digital ecosystem, right? We are doing everything online. Most of the things we are doing online, right? And now we have learned that we can actually do most of the things online, right? We don't need to basically go to offices. We don't need to go to banks or whatnot, right? And we can even get our groceries delivered. So we don't even need to step out of the house, right? For that matter. But and then that is very interesting trend, and because of which basically that has sort of accelerated the adoption of Web3 and Metaverse, right? And more or less, if you think about this, I think all these things, both Web3 and Metaverse, they are about basically empowering people in terms of how do they access value, right? In the most seamless and user-friendly ways it's possible, right? And also, I think when we talk about Web3 specifically, I think Web3 is about decentralization, democratization, right? It's about how do you basically decentralize the authority, but then you also, how do you basically democratize the access to basically value, right? It could be education, it could be money, it could be whatnot, right? But it's about how to make sure that everybody gets access to everything around the world, right? And with that thought process, what has happened is like a lot of different innovative players have jumped in the market, which are providing basically very innovative solutions, tackling different sort of problems, starting from finance, healthcare, GovTech, and so on and so forth, right? So a lot of different solutions are being built. But one of the key things which basically still needs to be resolved is basically identity, right? Because when we look at even the Web3 architecture, where basically we talk about different levels of blockchains, we look at basically dApps and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, digital identity is the most crucial aspect of any ecosystem for that matter, right? And that is where basically a decentralized identity sort of makes a lot of sense with respect to how do you solve these challenges. I'll give you another example. So now there's a lot of hype with respect to metaverses, right? Even Facebook basically sort of started Meta. And what we have seen is that since the inception of Meta, basically, earlier Facebook used to basically capture your personal information, right? All the information that you were sharing on social media, people were oversharing, but that information was being captured and monetized. But with the advent of Meta or Metaverse, basically now we are also sharing our biometric information, right? And that is now also being basically captured by these big tech organizations, and they would be able to monetize even without we being aware of it, right? So what has happened is that while we are talking about SSI and decentralization, decentralized ID, and talking about privacy and consent, some technologies or some platforms, they are taking it backward, right? So they are basically again taking privacy away from you. They are sort of getting more data about you. They are able to basically capture a lot of, now earlier they used to maybe capture 100 points about you. Now they can basically capture 200 points about you, because obviously now they also have access to your biometric information. So this is where the concept of decentralized identity and having an identity which is trustworthy, which is portable, which is interoperable, and which is multi-purpose is very, very important. And actually, if you think about this, one of the questions that the industry keeps talking about, interoperability. Actually, identity is one of the mechanisms which would basically solve the interoperability if you basically see identity as an infrastructure.
Thanks, Shiv. So even today, we are much used to the Google, LinkedIn, and the traditional centralized identities, and there must be some kind of adoption difficulties for SSI. And I'd like to understand from you about what are the current barriers for adapting SSI. Why don't we see SSI in play at a broader level as an adoption? And where do you believe that we will have a future where a common man will be able to still at the background, it may be necessary, but for him, the experience will be still traditional Web 2 and more familiar UI UX. And then he will be able to have aggregation or common identity, not just in finance, but healthcare or maybe health ID or other segments. And then at his will, he may be able to port his ID from one system to other and truly monetize that wealth that he's going to generate. So when first, let's start with the adoption difficulties, and then the futuristic dream world about identities. Is it too far, or there are ways where we can achieve that into probably some milestones? And how do you see that evolving to a level where first people will realize that I have a concept of identity which is important and it can essentially be across, and then I have capability of monetizing that identity, and I need to give consent to others before they get it, and I need to be more aware of what the data privacy and regulation rules and everything, and need to respect and understand more. And this is a long journey because it's not about technology, it's more about adoption, it's more about penetration of thought process, etc. So let's start with the adoption difficulties of SSI and then go to socioeconomic kind of factors about adoption and how exactly this will become a reality.
Right. I think that's a very, very, very important question, because unless we are able to solve the problem of adoption, I think this is not going anywhere. Correct. So I think when we look at, I think the adoption challenge, usually people think that technology is the adoption challenge, right? In the sense that I think some people are not equipped to use technology because of their cultural, because of their education, or because of their basically maybe financial backgrounds. But I think I would want to talk about India for a second here. So if you look at this, right, India has actually proven that actually, I think you can build technology solutions which can be basically even used by anyone, right? Because if you look at the payment apps, right, if you look at the payments ecosystem in India, I think even a street hawker is able to sort of basically make and receive payments without having any troubles. So I think it's about basically how are we basically designing our technologies, right, or our solutions, because most of the times we end up creating digital divide, right? So in the sense that I think we create a solution which can be basically only used by, let's say, the latest mobile devices. For example, you need to have the latest latest iPhone to basically do a facial recognition, as an example. Right now, what that means is that you have created a digital divide, because not everybody would be able to afford the latest iPhone or the Android phone. So you are saying that the people who cannot afford that phone, they would not be able to use the solution. So you are sort of excluding them, and this is the biggest challenge, right? Now, when we talk about, I think, when we talk about SSI, right? So obviously SSI is a concept, correct? How you implement and how do you implement is basically it depends on the different organizations and their intent, correct? Now, I think what we have, and when I talk about Earth ID, right, one of the things that we are clearly focusing on is the user experience, right? How do we ensure that anybody, like, how can we provide that experience where a street hawker is able to basically use their feature phone to sort of own their data, manage their identity, and then sort of monetize their identity, right? So that is one of the things that we need to focus on. And what we have to also see is that I think because when we talk about SSI, when we talk about decentralized identity, blockchain discussions comes into picture. And when you start talking about blockchain discussions, then the cryptocurrency discussion starts, right? And because there's such a huge, massive lack of awareness, right, outside the core experts of blockchain industry, right, that whenever you try to have this conversation with the government or an organization, they sort of start tying your SSI to basically cryptocurrencies, and they start talking about all the frauds that are happening in the industry for that matter.
Right? Crypto leader, man.
Right, but the good part is that because there are people and organizations like us who are sort of who has sort of taken this mantle to sort of push this thing forward, and we have spent more than 2 years in the industry only on education and awareness, where now people understand what we are talking about. Right now, and also I think SSI is sort of not SSI. I think one of the things that I want to talk about is that the pandemic actually had a silver lining in terms of that it sort of basically it sort of drove the adoption of Web3, metaverse, and in general basically SSI, because obviously if you are adopting these new ways of working, you need to basically be creative, right? And then organizations are now realizing the importance of this user-centric identity, right? In terms of how do they, because while it's a challenge to understand that you are giving away that ownership of the data to someone else, because obviously data is gold, right? But then what they are realizing is that if you give away the ownership, you are actually sort of protecting yourself from all the frauds that happen, all the data breaches that happen, and also all the compliance complications, right? So this is where what is happening, like the adoption. Yes, the adoption is slow, but the thing is that there's a lot of awareness, and given, if you look at the SSI industry, there are a lot of use cases which are being sort of played with. Obviously, a lot of pilots have been done. There are a lot of organizations which are also working with enterprises where experimentation is going on. There are also solutions which are live, right? And you can talk about, I think one of the examples is similar, right? Is simple. How do you basically make this KYC usable, right? Simple question, right? Right now, banks spend a lot of money on doing the KYC of their customers, and they have no other way of basically sort of, they cannot do it with this process. They have to do this. But with SSI, they have realized that they have an opportunity where they can basically create a reusable KYC, which can basically it could be intra-bank and interbank, right? So in the sense like that, you can use it within your organization. For example, I could have multiple departments, right? And then all the departments can share that data. And similarly, It can also be at interbank level, where different organizations can basically collaborate and use that. So in that sense, now slowly and steadily, I think the value of SSI and the value is being proven. And then this is not just happening in the financial space, it's happening in the heritage space, it's happening in education space, it's happening in the corporate space. So I think slowly and steadily, I think this is spreading, and there's a positive feedback. Obviously, there might be challenges with respect to how do you ensure that the existing investment, right? Because there are certain when you talk about the developed countries, they already have so much investment in their infrastructures that they struggle basically. They see that how do you make these things work together, the old and the new. But then we have found basically ways where these systems can work together, so they could be hybrid solutions. But there are opportunities like in countries like Africa, where we have greenfield, where you can basically deploy these new solutions from scratch. So in that sense, these things are working together, and we are making progress.
And Shiv, I would like to add on to that is, there are few parts of the Web3 like metaverse or the DeFi wherein the inherent quality of that platform itself does not require you to reveal your identity. You can still be anonymous. You still want to kind of proxy your identity and, still, get into the metaverse with a different identity, and you still want to experience it. But there are still, if you are into metaverse, let's say you want to still go ahead with a proxy identity, but one land wherein you want to get into the JP Morgan or the Samsung like metaverses, wherein you want to reveal your identity, what you are, unless you want to get those services enabled. That's where, switching between the real identity and the proxy identity is something we'll see in the future, which both will coexist. This is what.
Absolutely. And one other thing that just to extend to that, sorry, Ravi, I'll just one thing that is happening is like even my team is actually working on the value proposition for metaverse, right? How do we basically how do we enable different metaverse platforms using our SSI model? And one of the things is clear, right? It's about granularity of the identity, right? In terms of how do you control, right, in different use cases, right from anonymity to complete KYC? How do you basically ensure that the spectrum, you are able to basically support the spectrum? And I think that is where the data disclosure aspect is there, right? So SSI enables selective data disclosure and zero knowledge proof. So you are able to sort of do a lot of things with the same solution, but it has to be at the infrastructure level.
Thanks, Shiv. Thanks, Sai. So now let's put a focus on the concept which is Polygon ID, and we have Ravikant here. So Ravikant, if you can help us to explain the identity innovations in Polygon ecosystem, starting with Polygon ID, and then we'll go into the other areas like interoperability, integration with other identity solutions, etc. So over to you for introducing the identity piece of Polygon. We have the next session, which is there for getting into deeper dive on Polygon, and so stay tuned for that. But in this session, we'll focus on identity. So can you give us a kind of a broader picture of identity and focus from Polygon on identity solutions?
Yeah, certainly. I think so far the conversation has been very, very interesting, and we have been repetitively seeing from the other panelists in terms of the need for getting the identity into the Web3 space. And that is where, Polygon, which is aiming to become the de facto platform for Web3 space, consider that self-sovereign identity or self-sovereign protocol is very, very important component of the overall vision for Web3. And that's where the Polygon ID solutions that we have created is very aligned to the Web3 ideology, which is, privacy by default, your decentralization aspect, permissionless aspect, and certainly the computational trust that we bring in. So with this kind of an ideology, what we have created with Polygon ID is not only catering to the Web3 space, but it also caters to the Web2 space as well. There are very, very core concepts that we have in the Polygon ID. The first one is on-chain verification. This is where we are talking about how can a transaction that is happening on-chain can be verified, right? So when we are talking about the interaction related to metaverse, or let's say NFT marketplace, or let's say for any kind of smart contract, can we even verify that kind of thing and still remain, still bring in the privacy aspect into it? The second aspect is the permissionless attestation. And the third is again, privacy by default. So what I'm trying to give is a very brief overview. I know it's not going to be practically possible, and I don't want to steal time from the other panelists as well, Polygon ID is trying to bring in this three core aspects: the on-chain verification, permissionless attestations, and privacy by default. And we are trying to ensure that we tick in all the three boxes, which is something as a part of an innovation that we are bringing. And we are not aware if there is any other solution that is bringing all these three components together. And this is where we feel that, zero knowledge proof can be very, very vital in terms of creating something which is more secure and a better set of use cases using these self-sovereign identity protocols.
So Ravi, the next topic is such identity fabrics are getting created. And one of the key questions is, unless until they interoperate or integrate, the true, I'll say, usefulness of that is going to be questionable. So how do you see the interoperable integration between these identity solutions evolving? And are we looking at a market where these things will be coexisting or consolidating or on the path? And this is the beginning of the journey. So how do you see the evolution of this and interoperability and cooperation between these identity providers, and then evolutions further to that? Given Web3 is more kind of a, I'll say, like Lego pieces which you can assemble without even Polygon knowing about that. But how is the space evolving? How do you see the interoperability integration between identity solutions, and how from there, where do we go?
No, certainly. I think without a doubt, interoperability has to be there in order to bring a solution that is globally accepted, right? So I would like to, pick up the reference from the other discussion that we had from the other panelists. I know Sai and Shiv and Amit all has referred either Aadhaar, right? I think that gives me, let's say, an example where Reliance Jio, which has added more than 50 million subscribers in just 83 days. I think the foundation to adding such a huge number of user base within 83 days was the Aadhaar infrastructure. If we can consider that Aadhaar infrastructure, which the magical numbers that has been achieved by a startup like Jio, but that was at the national level. Now with the interoperability across the systems, if we are able to achieve, we can do such magical numbers at the global level. And this could be even, to the magnitude of higher to any range that we can think of. And that is where interoperability certainly is going to be very important, because we are making those use cases which are more global in nature nowadays, right? And that's where, in my personal view, I think interoperability is not going to be going away. It is something that we have to very, very curiously work on, and there are very active attempts that are going on. And that's where, to your earlier question, when we were talking about the adoption challenges, I believe one of the adoption challenges is also about the compatibility between the different standards that are out there, and in fact, the maturity of the standard at certain point in time. To the expectation that we are growing fast, I think the standards had to catch up the same, the same speed and acceleration. At the same time, once we are at a point where we would be able to interop between this different identity system, I think those kind of use cases are very vital in terms of a larger adoption at a global scale.
Thanks, Ravi. The other follow-up question on that is the enterprise use cases. So not just enterprises, but the question will extend further about what are the examples of startups who are building on Polygon ID. I know that not all startups will be like connecting with you. They probably will be doing it on own, but can you give some examples about innovative startups who are building on Polygon ID and enterprise use cases further to that, how they are evolving?
Sure. Yeah, I think I would say that some of the very obvious use cases that we keep hearing, whether it is related to customer onboarding, KYC, KYB, verification of different types of document, whether it is your employment verification, financial verifications, I think those are very standard and some of the very fundamental use cases that are coming up. We are also, very, very excited in terms of the future set of use cases that are going to be coming, which is related to machine communication. When we start talking about identity for machine, I think those are the set of areas which would open a whole new Pandora box in terms of how the communication between machine to machine happens, and we would be able to sort out, a newer set of use cases in that space. From Polygon perspective, I would like to touch upon a very important aspect which Amit has also mentioned in his previous slide, which is about the reputation. And I think this is a very newer area. And with the help of digital identity, we would be able to bring in some kind of a new form of reputation to be measured for a particular identity. and still intacting the privacy of a user. And that's where I believe, keeping it short, I would say that the reputation side of it is going to be creating new form of customer engagement models. So what we have been seeing is a user, either he's a whitelist customer or he's not a whitelist customer. But with the reputation scoring, we would be able to create several layers in between and make the customer engagement model even much more interesting. And it can be applicable again in the Web2 space as well as in Web3 space. And that's where, creating some kind of a reputational profile for the users, creating decentralized credit score that can be used across various financial primitives. At the same time, the domain expertise reputation that can also come in very handy in terms of evaluating a particular address, voting power delegation, and so on. And what we are seeing is these use cases at the moment are very Web3 native to a certain degree. So what we have started is sensing the number of inbound inquiries from decentralized autonomous organization, which are DAOs. But at the same time, these are also happening from these spaces like NFT marketplaces, metaverse, DeFi space, and so on. From the traditional space, I think larger players, the Web2 companies or the social media players, even the gaming studios, I think they are very keenly looking in terms of evaluating how this identity would be helping them in order to port certain type of assets from one platform to another and make it interoperable. So very exciting time, and we are seeing a lot of inbound inquiries in terms of how we can decentralize identity space.
Thanks, Ravi. So now let's go back to a couple of use cases. We have seen a few of them already, but let's revisit those areas and let's start with the KYC, or revisit the KYC part. So question is more to Shiv, and I'd like to understand from you about how one of the apps of identity, which is KYC, and how is it evolving around the world, specifically in Dubai, where we have interbank blockchain-based KYC solution and reusable KYC concept, and CKYC, why it may not is not taking traction, what are the adoption challenges there. So if you can just give us KYC as a use case for identity and how exactly it is shaping up, that would be great. And then post that, probably Amit, if you can add on top of that about how the Web2 KYC and Tidy probably about Web3 KYC and evolution on those areas. So Asim, over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I think KYC is a very important aspect, right? Because it's not just about financial space, right? There are a lot of other industries as well where the KYC of a customer or an individual is quite important before they can get access to services, right? And it's a massive challenge because the regulatory space keeps changing. It's very, very dynamic, right? If you around the world, there are a lot of regional laws, and as well as basically there are global laws, right? And then they keep maturing, and that is where I think the KYC as an industry or as a use case is quite challenging. And obviously I think we have seen that a lot of different innovative solution providers have attempted to solve this particular problem statement, right? Like from talking about basically digital onboarding, where you can sort of share your information using your smartphones, right? And everything, the document getting verified on the fly and all those sort of things. And also I think when we can also talk about the open banking initiative, where basically banks were trying to share data with each other with respect to so that they can reduce the friction in terms of how customers are being onboarded and how the customers are able to basically sort of get access to different services from the entire industry as a whole. But obviously there are obvious challenges, right? Because first of all, I think for such initiatives to basically to succeed, the intent is very, very important, right? Unless basically the right intent is there, and I think we have seen that there's a lack of intent from different players, because everybody wants to get access to others' data, but they don't want to basically open up their data, right? Because now and this is one of the biggest challenges, right? And one of the key problem in the industry is that a lot of these innovators, they are focusing on basically sort of enabling how the data is digitized, but they are not focusing on how the data is sort of decentralized, so that the question of ownership is solved. Because right now what happens is, like, every bank thinks that they own the data of their customers, and they're not willing to share that the data that they own, but they want to basically get an access to the data of the other bank's customers, right? That is never going to work. And that is why I think we haven't made a lot of progress with respect to CKYC, shared KYC, and XYZ. Why? Because their intent is not there, right? And this is where I think there's a fundamental problem, because we need to identify who's the true owner of the data, and that is what basically decentralized identity or SSI is doing, right? Clearly, the owner of the data is the individual, right? And that is where or basically an organization. So as soon as we realize that, as soon as we basically formulate that, then the data sharing becomes easy, because now the decision is not with a bank or not with an organization. It's with that individual, right? He or she basically now decides who he want to share this data with and then how. And if they clearly see a value, for example, I as an individual, if I see a value that yes, by sharing certain elements of my data or certain attributes about myself, if I'm able to basically buy convenience and buy service, then yes, I'm willing to share that. And obviously, I might be able to monetize it as well. And those are the tenets which SSI is enabling, right? So it's about how do you basically solve the problem of the data ownership, and then you solve the problem of data sharing. And that is what we have seen. We are basically working with a few banks and certain credit unions which are basically doing exactly the same, right? So what this means is that the first organization, it could be a bank or it could be a credit union within the ecosystem, they do a proper KYC, right? They get the data, they get the access to the data, they do all the checks and balances, and then they authorize that, okay, yes, this user is basically worthy to get access to financial services. Now, from here onwards, the different organizations don't have to do anything, because now it's sort of a token that has been given to this user, which could be a verifiable credentials, it could be an NFT, it could be XYZ, but it's a token which represents trust. And now this user or this individual can take that token and he can go to several other organizations within the ecosystem where the trust is already established, and they can basically use that token to sort of onboard the user without having to go through all those cumbersome processes. So it's a simple solution. It's just that the intent is, or the way of looking at the problem statement was not correct.
So Amit, Prove is doing a lot in Web3 as well. And I'd like to hear from you about how the use cases, various use cases of identity, including the KYC, do you see taking traction in the current innovation ecosystem that we have?
Yeah, to understand the developments, not just at Prove, but anywhere, I think I'll go back to convenience and security, the very fine balance that this industry tries to find. And so if you look at it, like if internet had its own native digital ID, right, we would probably not be having this session because things would have been much simpler, but there was none. And then in the Web 2, the problem was that if somebody like a Facebook or somebody creates that solution, people don't trust it, and it has lots of other issues around ownership and control. So I'm very really excited about what guys at Polygon are doing, because in the Web3 space, at least you are creating infrastructure or protocol. So the ownership control problem is not there, which is there definitely with Facebook creating it in Web2 space, right? So that is like a very, very good start. And I would also say that in Web2 space itself, the problems have still not been solved. There's lots and lots of stuff which is still happening. For example, let's go back to reusable IDs, right? We were discussing earlier. CKYC, right? CKYC, if you go to a bank branch in India and you try to say that, okay, I want to onboard today using CKYC, you will probably be laughed at, because the guy in the bank branch does not know what CKYC is. And I have personally tried doing this, right? Because I am in fintech space. So there's that training and education problem. There is a good technology API infrastructure being built problem there, and so on and so forth. Plus, I think the bigger thing is that where we are actually focusing time, and a lot of cutting edge technologies coming into reusable entities, can we use FIDO2 tokens or a standard which can then be very interoperable and portable and very safe and secure at the same time. So instead of creating your own proprietary stack, can we actually use a protocol or a standard that can then, and there are protocols like FIDO2 already exist to do reusable identity. So that's where actually we are putting our mind together. In fact, I was at Consensus this year, which is a very large crypto Web3 event, and I think everybody, including I was in literally like a 7-Eleven, and there were 2-3 guys coming out of the conference, and they were saying, earlier it was this, and now everybody's talking about digital identity, right? And the whole consensus was actually a lot of discussion was happening around digital identity and how it will happen in Web3. I think we think that including what Polygon ID is and other protocols which are developing, I think it will be very good to see how you can still satisfy the regulators which are there. How can you do things in a very KYC compliant fashion, so that a lot of other issues which have existed, right? There are real problems around money laundering and terrorism and all of that. So basically, can you do credentialing off chain and then use these protocols to do sort of authentication on chain, right? That's where I think the world is moving towards, and would love to see how things evolve.
Thanks, Amit. So I think this discussion is this can go for hours, and I'm sure that will be still very interesting, and people will still stay with us. But in the interest of time, I think we have last 5 minutes. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and I hope to see you again for the demo days and assessment of the startups. I'm sure with these sessions and these learning things, I think startups will be much more motivated to take identity as a piece of their approach or design and architecture there. Thanks, everyone. And I think we have next session coming. Some of you are part of that session also. So hope to see you soon. And thanks again for your participation. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.